Welcome back, everybody. President Trump unveiling his pick for Supreme Court last night while he awaits confirmation of his selected cabinet nominees. And after a week of executive orders, the president will be working with Congress to see his agenda implemented in the coming months. Joining us right now is a House Republican leading the way, Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. And Leader, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me on this morning.
You know, we hinted at this in the introduction, just the massive amount of new things that are coming down the pike right now. You've got the Supreme Court nomination, you have the immigration ban, you have the cabinet nominees, you have regulatory reform, you have tax overhaul, a lot of different moving pieces and a big agenda to try and get accomplished. And I guess the first question I have is, how do you try and prioritize and which things do you put forward first?
Well, we've got an order for the first 200 days. I mean, of course, you have to do Supreme Court, and that's the Senate. The cabinet, you've got to get that filled through. There's going to be 1,200 positions when you change administrations that have to be confirmed. But what we're looking at is regulatory, health care, tax reform. In those orders, we have the Congressional Review Act that allows us to look back the last 60 legislative days. And remember, that means we had to be in session, and there were a lot of days we were not because of the campaign year last year. And going forward, we can pass those bills in the House, but they could pass in the Senate with just 51. So they become privileged on January 30th. So you'll see our first bill moving today, the stream buffer rule that affects the coal industry throughout America. It would put 64% of coal throughout America out of reach for energy production. It would eliminate anywhere between 40 to 78,000 jobs. And that wasn't even put into effect until after the election in December. So we're taking a look at that, moving that through today, and we have 5 other regulations going through this week.
Leader McCarthy, you are the second Republican in the last week who has talked about the first 200 days here on this show. We always talk about the first 100 days. The Trump administration has certainly laid out what they plan to get accomplished in the first 100 days. Is the first 200 days that you all are using kind of a nod towards the idea that this is a big agenda and it's going to take more than 100 days to really get all of this accomplished?
When you think about how much has to be done, you have to restructure Washington. So there's a lot to get done. You can't just reform health care. That's 20% of the economy, what they went through to doing the last 5 years. Changing the regulatory system. Think about what the last administration did. For the last 5 years, they implemented, on average, 83 major rulings, each one of them costing more than $100 million to business. They added more than 12 King James Bibles to the Federal Registry in regulation. Then think about tax reform. No matter what you do there, it's very difficult, but we've got to get the economy growing if we want to solve any of our problems. And you've got to do all 3 of those pillars, and then you also have infrastructure at the same time. To get those done, you cannot cram that into a 100-day agenda because you want to get it done correctly. And they build upon themselves. So 200 days is the right, in my view, the right time frame to make sure it happens through the House and the Senate, while at the same time getting the appointments through the Senate.
You said that you're going to be tackling things regulatory first, then health care, then tax reform in that order. And you're right, these are all very complex, sort of difficult things to try and find agreement on. But when you really look at health care and pulling back Obamacare, trying to come up with a replacement, that to me seems like a much more complicated scheme to come up with than tax reform, where you may find some bipartisan support depending on how things get put forth. Why health care first? Is that because of campaign promises?
Well, healthcare we've been working on quite some time. It builds upon itself. If you're able to work through healthcare, it's what the American people need and desire. And truthfully and frankly, healthcare is collapsing. Obamacare created 23 co-ops, provided $2 billion. 18 of them have already collapsed. You see premiums continue to rise. You have more than 3,000 counties in America, but 1/3 of them only have one option. So you have to relieve them of that. That's why you have to go after health care first. And in doing so with health care, it changes the baseline for tax reform, allows you to have a broader tax reform overall, which helps all of America.
Leader McCarthy, it's good to have you on while California is still a state. I'm not sure I'm not sure how that's going to work. If there is a secession, you would be like an ambassador when you come on, an ambassador to the United States. I mean, no, hopefully, but there are crazy stuff, crazy things happening in the country. Very disturbing piece in the Journal. Chances for cross-party compromise are dimming in the last couple of weeks in the wake of a lot of these executive actions. You can only do so much with 51 or 52 votes. You're going to run out. We saw what happened with Obama, too. President Obama, you know, they pushed through Obamacare and then a couple other things, and nothing happened. Was there any legislation for 6 years? I mean, all he had was executive orders at that point. You guys could end up in the same boat if you're not thinking long term.
You've got to think long term. I say to all of America, let's step back and take a deep breath. Let's put our country before ourselves. Let's put the people before the politics.
Not going to happen. I'll read you some of Chuck Schumer's comments this morning on Neil Gorsuch. If you think that's going to happen, well, you don't think that's going to happen because it's not.
Well, look at the rollout last night. I was there in the White House. I thought the rollout, the president did a tremendous job. I thought his selection, and I look at Donald Trump and I look at the way that he handled this selection, even all the way back into the campaign. He has taken the role of president of picking the Supreme Court very seriously. He laid out to the American public very early a list of those that he would look to. So they actually had a choice and a belief to understanding of what his thought process would be here. He looked back and who he selected. Neil Gorsuch is an amazing individual. I think probably one of the most qualified individuals ever to be nominated for the court. Having just gone through a nomination back in 2006 that was unanimous, where Schumer actually supported it. Now, if it's going to come down to politics where people are just going to say no to that, I think that's when the American public have got to rise up and say you can't put up with this.
Both sides could probably do well to let the other side, give the other side enough rope to hang themselves. Now, in 2 years, right now, I don't know. You've got protests everywhere. You've got protests outside Schumer's house. They're mad at him because he's being too nice to Republican. So you could, if you
unfortunately, I haven't seen that side yet.
Yeah. They're mad that he's cooperating at all. But I think that the country spoke and said something on November 8th. If you guys just aren't completely obnoxious, in 2 years, you could get another 7, 8 senators, probably, in states where Trump won 60% of the counties. So if you don't screw it up, you might get to 60 eventually.
You know what? I'd rather save the country than worry about whether I win more elections in the future. It's too important. I think if there's anything this election should have taught everyone, when they sat out there, they read into the polls totally wrong.
Right.
One thing that President Trump did, he listened to voices that nobody else in Washington was listening to. So people ought to put the politics aside and start listening to people. And I think doing so would transform this country. And really, when you look at the agenda, that's what the country was asking for.
Okay. Gorsuch will get in, but I just still wonder about the nuclear
option.
The nuclear deal, because it's 2 years away. I don't know if you get any of those red state Democrats this early. They're going to, they got to probably not break ranks early on. Although it'd probably be a good idea to do it with do nuclear this time and wait, because there could be another one. Trump might get another pick. Anyway, Majority Leader, thank you.